Welcome to the Reconnection Club podcast, the show that helps parents heal troubled relationships with their adult sons and daughters. I'm your host, psychotherapist Tina Gilbertson. Each week, I'll offer you compassion, clarity, and personal development tips designed to help you reconnect, not only with your child, but with yourself. Now let's get started. Over the years, rejected parents have shown me cards and emails that their now estranged adult children wrote to them when they were younger, or even within the past year. And these cards express the most beautiful sentiments of love and affection and admiration and gratitude. They say things like, "I'm so blessed to have you as my mother," or "You're the best dad I could ever have asked for." If you've ever received a message like this from your child who is now estranged, you've no doubt wondered, how did you go from being such a great parent and person in the eyes of your child to being someone she now apparently wants nothing to do with? How did you fall from number one mom or dad to public enemy number one? That's what I hope to explain on today's show. But first, let me assure you, you are not the only parent this has ever happened to. It does happen, and I've seen the evidence myself. The adult child's behavior in these cases obviously raises some questions. What changed? And when did it change? And why? I'd like to suggest to you that there may not be quite as much of a change here as there seems to be. There are, broadly speaking, two reasons why children write beautiful words to parents whom they later reject. And as usual, these reasons can overlap. The first is that the child has ambivalent feelings. She may believe every word she wrote in those heartfelt cards and letters, and she also has other feelings about your relationship. She's torn between genuine love and appreciation on the one hand, and on the other, something else. And that something else could be a number of things that your child might be feeling. Just a few examples that I'll offer here. It could be an uncomfortable sense of obligation that leads to frequent feelings of guilt. It might be an unfulfilled desire to really be seen as a separate and unique individual. It could be an accumulation of hurt feelings from perceived criticism, abandonment, or rejection. In any case, the words your child offered you were real and true. But so are the thoughts and feelings that are now fueling the estrangement. Both sets of feelings can exist in the same person at the same time. There's nothing unusual about that. Like many important aspects of life, your child's feelings toward you are not uniform, and they're not tidy. His feelings and attitudes may vary, they may ebb and flow over time, and competing thoughts and feelings can always coexist. It's perfectly normal. I'm sure you have your own experiences of ambivalent feelings in your relationships. You love your spouse, but maybe sometimes he drives you up the wall. Maybe you long to connect with your child, but at the same time, you resent her behavior. Maybe you feel hurt by and sorry for your child at the very same time. Most of us can find ambivalent feelings in our own lives at least some of the time. And these kinds of feelings towards one's parents, well, that's very, very common. I was recently talking to a friend who's now in his 60s, and he was telling me that he became estranged from his parents in his late 20s, and that lasted a little bit into his 30s. He did reconcile with them after a few years, but thinking back on it now, he marvels at the loving cards and letters that he sent when he first traveled abroad during his college years. He told me that he expressed undying affection for them when he wrote to them. He said they must have been so confused when just a few years later, they couldn't even get him to cross town for a visit or even meet them for coffee. Like many estranged adult children, my friend had a deep ambivalence toward his parents at that time of his life. He always loved them, but at a certain point in his younger days, he needed distance. So he spent several years dodging invitations, and then eventually he said he just sort of found himself more willing to engage. So he resumed a normal relationship with them, and they enjoyed that for several decades before his parents eventually passed away. Even now, 30 years later, he still isn't sure exactly why he needed that space that he was taking. He's just glad he eventually did reunite with his parents before it was too late. If your child keeps growing as a person, her ambivalence may also resolve in favor of reconciliation. If she has specific complaints about your relationship, you can work on understanding how to address those while you wait for her to do whatever work she's doing herself. She doesn't need to be available in order for you to do your side of the work on that relationship. And that's why the Reconnection Club exists. It's basically a school where parents study parent-child relationships and engage in personal growth as a vehicle for making repairs, even if their children are not in touch at all at the moment. It may help you to know that people who are emotionally healthy do tend to have mixed feelings toward their parents and their childhoods. People who view their childhood and their parents as perfect in every way, and on the other side, people who refuse to acknowledge anything positive about their childhood or their parents whatsoever. Both extremes are associated with insecure attachment and poor relationship outcomes in adulthood. So you want your child to have a balanced view of you because that's a pretty good signal of emotional health and maturity. What I'm saying is that there's nothing inherently weird about your child who once said, "You're the best," now saying, "Don't call me." As with the friend I talked about earlier, it may simply be a phase along your child's path toward maturity and eventually empathy. Okay, I've talked about ambivalence as one reason why a child might send a loving card or letter and then turn around and estrange himself from you. A second and often overlapping possibility is that your child wrote those loving words because, rightly or wrongly, he perceived those words as meeting an emotional need in you. Many children say what they believe their parents want to hear, especially, but not only, when it's expected, like on Mother's Day or Father's Day, for example. The message may be, "You are a terrific parent," or "I'll never stop needing you," or those kinds of things that the child might believe are important for the parent to hear. But whether consciously or unconsciously, children heading for estrangement may express these sentiments out of either kindness or self-preservation or both. If children fear the loss of parental love or approval, self-preservation could drive them to try to please the parent as much as possible. And parents don't have to be mean or abusive for children to fear a loss of their love. Children are naturally attuned to how their parents feel about them, and some kids have less confidence than others in their own worthiness. If the child is sensitive and kind, he may simply wish to soothe away any anxiety or sadness that he senses in the parent. Saying what he thinks the parent needs to hear is an act of compassion. Both self-preservation and kindness, along with genuine feelings of affection, may all play a role when children offer parents glowing words of love, gratitude, or praise. So that's why you might now be estranged from the same child who expressed warm and loving thoughts in the past. he may still feel that way, but also need distance. Or even if he did feel that way, those lovely cards might have been motivated more by trying to meet your needs than his need to express himself. I know that regardless of how much might have been ambivalence and how much was your child attempting to offer some validation, some of what I've said today might be difficult to hear and to think about. And that's true of many other episodes of this podcast as well. So I want to say that if you've been listening to this podcast and you're still listening, I think you have courage and the will to keep growing, and I have faith in your ability to change your relationship with your child. Too often, parents in your situation stay stuck in hopeless confusion because confusion is often less painful than understanding. Blaming the child for being wishy-washy, refusing to seek actionable information in her behavior, these are ways of staying confused. But they're also ways of cultivating helplessness and remaining painfully stuck for longer than necessary. So anytime you read or hear or learn something that makes the situation seem a little bit less confusing for you, even though it's painful, you are taking steps toward a solution to the problem of estrangement. And I'm honored that you're listening to this podcast. I hope you stay with me for as long as it's helpful and relevant in your life. Until next time, remember that you are a loving, lovable, and still growing human being. So please take good care of yourself. Bye for now. If you've enjoyed this episode of the Reconnection Club podcast, I invite you to check out reconnectionclub.com. The Reconnection Club is for parents at any stage of estrangement from their adult, child, or children. So whether you've just realized there's trouble between you, you've been living with estrangement for years, or you're newly reconciled but still walking on eggshells, the Reconnection Club is your essential resource for information, support, and continued personal growth. With our courses and workshops, expert interviews, monthly Q&A calls, and a friendly, active community, the Reconnection Club is a wonderful place to be for anyone suffering the pain of estrangement from an adult, child, or children. So check it out at reconnectionclub.com.